Star Wars: The Grey War by Nathan Brown. Acknowledgements. First to God, the author and finisher of our faith, Matthew Koch and Josh Fenwick, whose patience and suggestions helped turn messy ideas into this finished product. Drew Karpyshyn, whose books laid the brilliant foundation that my story is built on, and whose website's advice of if you really think your idea is good, then turn it into something useful, prompted me to begin this project. My grandfather, whose quest to find me all the Hardy Boys, got me interested in the written word. Sue Spires, who took on the daunting task of editing my miraculously terrible grammar. Chapter 1. Rogan stared down on the dark forest from his perch, waiting in silence. His infrared eyes picked up nothing but the cool gray of the surrounding vegetation. He had only been out for a few hours, but he could hear the clouds rumbling above him, letting him know the rains would be coming soon. He either had to get something soon or go a day without food. If he ended up caught in the torrential rains, he doubted he'd be able to navigate the forest and get back to his cave. If he was still out when the day broke, he wouldn't survive the sun's poisonous rays. His stomachs grumbled, as if they could read his thoughts and were fighting the idea of leaving without food. He heard a soft rustle near the base of a tree to his right, loud in the dead silence of the night. His cold black eyes darted to the source, and he saw the warm orange glow of a living body. His heart immediately started beating, flooding him with a rush of anticipation. He could see the outline of the thing's warm body. It stood high on 4 thin legs, somehow supporting its long, plump body. It had a long snout and used it to dig up bugs and large ears that stood up straight, twitching constantly, scanning for any noise. He recognized the animal as a Huronii. Based on the size, he thought it was a male, nearly full-grown. Moving at a painfully slow pace in order to keep from making noise, he rose from his crouch and made his way over to the other tree, taking care not to shake the branches with his massive weight. In a few seconds, he was standing on a branch above the unaware animal, clinging tightly to the bark of the massive tree. Crouching down, he wrapped his flexible tail around the thick branch that was supporting his weight. Almost all Barbel hunters used blaster rifle or set up traps early in the night. Rogan preferred to use his sharp-clawed hands. The Huronii stood on its hind legs, frantically digging at the tree, with his sharp front hands for bugs, trying to get food before one of the many predators of the night found him. Rogan lowered himself centimeter by centimeter down the tree, his tail wrapped about the thick branch above him, keeping him from falling to the forest floor. He stretched out his claw's hand and reached for the animal's skinny neck. The high-pitched whump of a hunting blaster pierced through the silent night as a bright streak of red flew from the bushes. It struck the Huronii, sending a waft of burnt flesh up to Rogan as he curled back up to his perch and searched the hazy darkness. For a moment he saw nothing and considered taking the animal and running while he had the chance. Before he made the decision, the cool blue heat signature of another reptilian Barbel emerged from the dense foliage. Curious, Rogan switched to his normal vision and saw it was a red-skinned boondall. The distance and the darkness kept him from seeing what clan the red-skinned hunter was from, but it didn't matter. Rogan was in boondall territory. Hunting in another tribe's territory was punishable by death. He couldn't be caught. He used his claws to crawl down the massive tree, completely unseen, his coal-black scales and matching eyes blending in with the dark night around him. He waited as the hunter walked forward to pick up his catch, gun hanging limp at his side. Rogan lowered to a crouch, 1 foot on the ground and 1 on the trunk of the tree. Rogan pushed off with his coiled legs and pounced on the man, his body completely extended. Just before he reached him, the hunter looked up in surprise, facing Rogan with wide red eyes. Rogan reached with his hands for the man's mouth, wanting to silence him before he could call for help. The other man reacted much faster than Rogan would have thought possible. He dropped his rifle and his hands shot up, grabbing tightly to Rogan's wrists. The hunter rolled backward, shoving his feet into Rogan's stomach, pushing him up and sending him flying. Rogan flipped in the air past the man and landed on his back, the soft, mossy grass cushioning his fall. As Rogan grabbed and turned around, he saw the hunter reaching down to grab his rifle. Too far away to grab it before the man did, Rogan called upon the force, sent a wave of energy out at the rifle, pushing it through the unkempt grass and fallen leaves. The hunter turned and regarded him with a surprised, quizzical look. Rogan gave him a low, hissing growl in response and used the excitement of the coming fight to shake off the momentary weariness that always came over him when he used the force. The hunter looked up at him and, seeing the angry red scar across his chest and abdomen, hissed in recognition. "So the blight of the Barbel crawls out of his lonely pit to hunt. This is the first sighting in months. We started thinking you'd moved on to a different forest, or died." "It's not the first sighting," Rogan replied in a cold voice, crouching low and preparing for the man's next attack. "There are, 3 or 4 red-skinned weasels missing from your tribe?" he asked. He felt a flash of hot anger from the hunter, and the man sprinted towards him, his teeth bared in anger. Rogan was ready for the rage-fueled attack he had coaxed out of the man. The hunter jumped forward with his arms extended, a dark red streak aiming to tackle Rogan to the ground. When the hunter's hands were just centimeters away from Rogan's body, Rogan jumped back into a sprawl and let the hunter's forward momentum crash into him. In the same motion, Rogan slipped his right arm under the hunter's throat. The man's momentum and weight pushed him back, but Rogan managed to stay on his feet. He tightened his grip on the man's throat and leaned into the man, using his significant weight to press down on his neck from above. The hunter immediately started to panic, trying in vain to squeeze his fingers in between his neck and Rogan's arm. As much as he struggled, he couldn't find any space for his fingers to get through. He started scratching desperately at the larger man's forearms, trying to dig into Rogan's scales with his sharp claws. Rogan ignored small stabs of pain and kept his arms locked. After a few minutes, the attacks got slower, and then the hunter went limp. Rogan wrenched his head to the left, snapping his neck. He didn't want the man waking up later and telling the story. If word continued to spread, he became a real and proven threat rather than a mystery in the forest. People would start looking for him. He was certain they knew his general location, and, if he wasn't careful, they would come after him. As it was, this was just another hunter who had gone missing. No proof it was Rogan. And there were many dangerous things that could have killed the man. Rogan released his grips and let himself relax, his heart starting to slow and his blood cooling. He stood up with a grunt, weariness quickly falling over him like a heavy cloak. He slung the smaller red body over his shoulder, then bent down to get the Heroni and heaved it over his other shoulder. Scene change. Congus was alone in the barren training room beneath her home on Argonar. She paced quickly back and forth across the long stone floor, filled with rage. As she walked, a storm of pure force energy brewed around her, picking up and dislodging chunks of stone from the walls of empty training room. As the intensity of the storm grew, she stood in the eye of the storm without noticing the destruction it wrought. She was too angry to notice, too focused on her failure. It had been almost 4 years since her apprentice had left. Yet still hatred brewed within her whenever she thought of him. She honestly wasn't sure what had made her matter, that he would dare to leave, or that she had been such a failure as a master. Never in her time as an assassin had she failed a mission. She was spoken of to this day as one of the galaxy's most ruthless and dependable killers. As an apprentice learning under Darth Zana, she had astonished her master with her quick learning. For a moment the rage was forgotten, and Darth Cognis smiled. Her poor master. After only 10 years of training, she had risen above Darth Zana and challenged her, defeating her with surprising ease. But now she was supposed to be a master, but a master with no apprentice. She screamed in frustration, and the storm dissipated violently, the loose stones crashing into the walls and exploding into dust. She sat trying to calm herself, to clear her mind and figure out where she had gone wrong. As she searched back, the memories flew past with stark clarity. She was amazed at the blindness of her past self. How had she not realized how foolish it was to choose Millennial to be her apprentice? There had been so many factors forcing her hand. Chief among them was that she had risen above and defeated her master so quickly that she'd never had time to find a potential candidate while she was still an apprentice. So, after defeating her master, she realized her mistake and began panicking, tearing across the galaxy in search of someone worthy. She'd come across Millennial on a tiny moon far from the worlds of the core. He was living alone, run out of his small town years before because of his glaring deformity. She had been desperate for an apprentice, and as a young man whose entire world had been turned on him, he had been desperate for guidance and somewhere to belong. She had been drawn to him because he was like her, an outsider among his own people. Cognis should have been on guard for his revolt. Growing up as an outcast had encouraged a tendency to question rules and authority, and his rebellious spirit had been stewing through his entire apprenticeship. As Cognis looked through her memories, she saw the times it had boiled up, over and over before finally bursting. Cognis saw now that she had been too soft with him, entertaining his ideas and slight disobedience instead of reprimanding and stomping out these seeds of defiance before they sprouted. Cognis dragged herself from her trance. It didn't matter how it happened. Her apprentice had severed himself from the lineage of true Sith and fled from Cognis to Dromund Kaas. She had for a time entered the idea of going to Dromund Kaas and convincing Millennial to join her once again. But she quickly dismissed the idea. He was a weakness and a blight of shame on the Sith, and especially her. She had always considered heading to Dromund Kaas and purging him from existence, but knew that there wasn't any point to it. He was a worthless failure, and she would only be wasting her time to go after him. She pushed the thoughts of her old apprentice from her mind and focused on the future instead. She'd been searching for an apprentice for 3 years, and she hadn't found anyone to replace Darth Millennial. There had been a few possibilities, but her experiences had made her more critical, fearful of wasting all that time just to have another apprentice fail. With a forceful, angry breath, she cleared her mind of worry and stress and opened herself up to the Force to let its calming energy flow through her. As she opened herself up, just trying to control her emotions more, a vision flashed into her mind. She was transported to a large, open-topped coliseum. Inside, she saw tens of thousands of beings from all across the galaxy roaring in the stands. She zoomed quickly, and Cognis saw a dirt gladiatorial pit, spikes lining the edges. 3 combatants were inside, 1 dead and 2 still locked in combat. They were 2 Cathar and the massive black-skinned reptilian she thought she recognized as a Barabel. As uncharacteristically large Cathar was, impaled on a spear and lying dead on the floor. In the middle of the pit, the Barabel was using the Force, lifting the smaller Cathar off his feet and choking him. The barbell had multiple cuts and stabs on his legs, draining blood, as well as a long scar on his chest and abdomen that she could tell was old. She focused harder on the vision, hoping to discover which planet this would take place on, or was taking place on. She focused in, her field of view widened again and panned out. Below the stands was a large sand arena with empty gladiatorial pits of varying sizes with different aspects to add danger, from huge holes to pockets of quicksand. She caught sight of a geyser, billowing bright green smoke in the middle of the pits, and the vision came to a quick end, jolting her back to reality. Her eyes snapped open and she was once again alone in the cold, still room. Her heart beat rapidly and her skin was soaked with cold sweat. Having a vision always did that to her. Her anger forgotten, Cognis walked quickly across the floor and up the stairs to above the ground level of her home. She moved over to her computer, a stark contrast to her bare and seemingly ancient basement, and sat down to get a clearer picture of her vision. She first searched planets with famous gladiatorial pits. She noted certain names with a smile, memories rising up from her past life. She got rid of all names she recognized, knowing none of them had naturally occurring geysers. She searched the atmospheres, makeup, and other aspects of the remaining planets to see which had the potential to produce dangerous hot springs. There was only one planet left on the list. Alcaro. It was on the edge of the outer rim territories of the Albanin sector. She decided to wait until tomorrow to leave, hoping that, as she dreamt, the Force would show her the meaning of this vision. Scene change. Rogan trudged slowly towards the mouth of his cave, still weary from his short fight and his use of the Force. Jogging back, carrying the two bodies hadn't helped either. Before going on, he leaned to the side and let the body of the red-skinned barbell slide off his shoulder and to the ground outside the entrance of the cave, adding to the messy pile of bodies. There were 7 bodies now, 3 grays and 4 reds with the last entry. He'd only ever killed 1 black, whom he buried off to the side of the rest. As he walked past the groups of bodies, he couldn't help but look at the telltale mound of disturbed dirt. He slowed down, lost in thought, bile rising up. He worked to keep his mind off the mound of dirt just a couple feet away from the entrance of his cave. He wondered, as he had many times before, why he always felt so tired and drained after he used the Force. From what little he had heard about the strange power, it was often used to rejuvenate, but he couldn't imagine it bringing him anything but weariness. His assumption was that one had to be trained in its use in order to fully take advantage of that. The only problem was he didn't have anyone to train him. There had been a moment when he could have gone with the Jedi, but that chance slipped away a long time ago, and, to be honest, he had run from the opportunity. Now all he had was this small but useful tool that was just another advantage over his opponents. With a quiet groan, he pushed it out of his head. This was just another thought that led down a path to nowhere. He shook his head and continued into the cave. He refused to dwell on it. He had done what he needed to do, and there was no changing it. He impaled the Heroni on a stick and started a fire. His stomach growled in anticipation, and the smell of cooking animal filled his small cave. Outside, the rain started pounding, signaling the end of another day.